Welcome back to Global Business Night with Gibson Odoka Jr. I am super excited to have you here today. Wow, what a beautiful moment. Last time we talked about how starting a business can change everything for you. And the week before, or the episode before that, we talked about how to find great business ideas, and they were all bangers. So if you haven't watched any of those episodes, please go back and watch them because they will be the bedrock for today's conversation. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please click on the subscription button, enable notifications, so each time I put out a new episode, you will get notified. All right. So today we're going to be talking about the business of your industry. Wow, I'm super excited because for a while, I didn't really understand a lot of stuff. I came from what I would say entrepreneurial disadvantaged background in the sense that my parents weren't initially entrepreneurs. They are regular 9 to 5 hours, and that had some impact in me in a way that a lot of people won't really understand. I'm just gonna explain that. Now, by virtue of them being 9 to 5 hours, their income level wasn't so big at the time. Right now, they are entrepreneurs, but at the time, their income wasn't so big. It's just regular 9 to 5 work. And what that does was we lived in a neighborhood where 98% of the residents were working class citizens. The elementary school I went to, same, about, in fact, that one, I think 100% of my classmates or the people who attended the same elementary school, their parents were working class citizens. The church I went to automatically is the same. Almost everyone there were working class individuals, and that wasn't easy. That wasn't easy. That wasn't funny because a lot of things, happen. The conversation with kids, that those were our formative ages. So the conversations that we had nothing to do with entrepreneurship. We were super ambitious, but our ambition was limited to our environment. Right, like for me, you know, I wanted to be an astronaut because at the time, what we talk about is how to scale up in this ladder, and business wasn't part of it. In this scaling, what we were looking at is how to scale up career-wise, career-wise. So I wanted to be an astronaut, but looking at I went to talk to my uncles, like this is what I want to do, and they told me, well, sorry, there's no university that will certify you to be an astronaut in Nigeria at the time. So, that dream just fizzled off. Next, I thought about becoming petroleum engineer because that's the next smart thing to do. I came from River State in Nigeria. It's a place where almost every community, have an oil well or oil reserve. So here I am. Um, here I am, just browsing through one of the newspapers my dad bought, and an article caught my attention. It was about Argentina. The oil well was drying up. Oh yeah, it was drying up, but there was a potential of oil well drying up. And that scared me because at that point, I was just trying to think long term. Like, if I should become petroleum engineer, what would happen to my future if the oil well in my community or in my state or in Nigeria dries up, meaning there'll be no job for me. So automatically, I discarded that petroleum engineering aspect, and my next best shot was becoming a doctor. So, in senior high school, I was in sciences, and it was just fantastic. It was great. I did a lot of excuse me. I did, take my science courses very serious. I was reading very, very hard, and thankfully for me, we had a principal that imbibed that culture of studying into my into the student of my high school. So just after our high school, one fateful afternoon, I was, planning on going to university, and on that fateful day, I decided to meet one of my teachers, you know, and on getting to her house, we exchanged pleasantries, and just a few minutes later, conversation led to conversation, and she was like, "Hey, Gibson, that reminds me, I know you wanted to be a doctor, but sorry, I have a bad news for you. Doctors are not rich." Oh wow, that was scary for me. When she said that, I'm like, wait, 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 wait. You mean doctors are not rich? She said, yeah, doctors are not. I said, well, I have a friend whose dad is a doctor, and they're doing okay. She said they are not rich, and somehow, the conversation fizzled off. And I went back home. I thought about it briefly, but I can't really, understand what she meant. She told me after she said doctors are not rich, she said you should be a businessman. You should get into business. Okay, yeah, she said I should get into business. So, when I thought about that, I went through my environment again. I had to stroll around as a young, like I was still a teenager. I went around my environment and I saw what the people who seem to be doing well are engineers and doctors. So what she said didn't really resonate with me by virtue of my environment. So I discarded that conversation. But hey, when I got into college, something interesting happened. One fateful day, I had a flashback. I had a flashback of that conversation, and at this time, I have my personal computer, so I decided to do a little research on what she meant. In the course of my research, I was amazed, like, whoa, it was like a eureka moment for me, getting to discover the likes of John C. Maxwell is a businessman, the likes of Bill Gates is a businessman, Mark Zuckerberg is a businessman, Mark Cuban is a businessman, Jack Ma of China is a businessman. And the one that even scared me the most was getting to know that Donald Trump is a businessman in real estate. He's a real estate developer. So now, here's even what shocked me about Donald Trump's one. You know, I had this friend growing up in my neighborhood whose dad is in, yeah, let me call it real estate. You know, so, but my idea of real estate was very limited. It was basically, his dad built a house, in the, I think it was probably 3 plus of land or thereabout, yeah, three plus of land. So he built a house for him and the family, and then built a few houses where people can rent. So this was what I understood as real estate, and that was a shocker for me, getting to hear that Donald Trump is in real estate, and that made me to, do research on real estate, and I realized his own real estate is different from what I knew to be real estate. Prior to now, my idea of real estate is someone, you build a house and people rent, and I mean people pay you rent yearly, you know. And here I am seeing another level to real estate where you build a house and you sell, people pay either instrumentally for a period of time. So, that it raised my curiosity on business. I started doing a lot more research. So, here we are into this topic. I said it's the business of your industry. First of all, before we go deep, what is a business? Because I don't want to assume a lot of people, everybody knows what a business is. Just like myself, I was in that phase, and I didn't know. So a business basically is an entity or an organization that is engaged in any commercial, industrial, or professional activity strictly with the aim of making money. I won't emphasize a whole lot on that, but something important is for some of you, when you start studying the evolution of business and evolution of economy, in the medieval era, they encourage people to be entrepreneurs. However, in setting your price as an entrepreneur, you are not allowed to put price to give you profit, except if that profit will be used for general good of everyone. So it's a crazy era. Even private property ownership was encouraged. However, it must not be for your own satisfaction. It has to be for the general mass satisfaction. So that was pretty interesting era. Today, business has metamorphosed. A lot of countries adopt capitalism, like the United States of America, and they've sold capitalism to almost every part of the world. Russia used to be a communist state, but today capitalism is a big part of their life. And for anyone who needs to get into business, you have to go do some research on capitalism. That is the only way um, you know, um, you can understand business in a really broad sense. So, in economics, there's something, um, there is what we call the three basic economic questions, which are what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. This question is the bedrock of economic conversations, and that is the same for entrepreneurs. However, in business, we've modified it a little, and anyone. I mean, when I mean anyone, I'm talking about those who are not entrepreneurs, who are nine to fivers. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Don't get me wrong, but I have problem with there are people who are super smart, who are super talented, who are outliers. But for some reason, probably because of lack of information, or by virtue of not just knowing, they remained nine to fivers the entire of their working careers without exploring this other part of life called entrepreneurship. So, in business or as a nine to fiver, this is for you. If you want to transition into the business of your industry, the three key questions you have to ask yourself is: in my industry, who do we serve? How do we serve them? That means, what do we serve them? Like, what do we produce? What service do we give to them? What do we sell to them? What do we produce? What do we manufacture? And then the last one is, why do we serve these people? The moment you're able to answer these three questions accurately: what do we produce? I mean, like, what do we who do we serve? How do we serve them? And why do we serve them? The moment you can accurately answer this question, I'm guaranteeing you are on your way to knowing the business of your industry. Now, let's get deep into it. I already talked about Donald Trump and the realization that the likes of Donald Trump is a businessman. Now I'm going to break this down a little. I'm going to touch in a few industries so people can, just in case your industry falls into this, okay, you have something to think about. So one of them is photography. Photography, I'm going to talk about photography and the movie industry together. you know Photography, a lot of people, I've seen so many people who are in photography, what they call photography business. you know but that is not really the business of photography. What some of them think photography is: taking pictures, editing pictures. No, that's not the business of photography. You're just a photographer who have to do some a little editing to get the best of to get something out of it, right? And in photography, those who are in the business of photography focus on patenting. Very important. You have to patent. Some of them, they go as far as creating superior lens. They study the current lens used by the big photograph, yeah, like camera companies, like the Nikons, the Fiji, the Sony, and you name them. They study their lenses and just and think about um, how they can give them superior lens to what they currently have, and by so doing, the patentee sell their patent to them, give them say the license to them to use it for a period of time and they get paid hugely. Not those who snap in events. I mean, they make money, but those are not the big players in the photography um, business. All right. So, in that regard, someone creates a superior lens, takes it to Sony, takes it to Fiji, takes it to Nikon, or even Samsung and Apple, and they buy them. They buy patent or they buy access to this lens for their phone cameras or for their camera in general. So that is it. In the movie side, a lot of people just assume, or there's this huge respect accorded to people who are movie stars, which is a great thing. And it's a fantastic thing. They accord them with great respect. Some people see them as successful people, but hey, that's not true. That's not really true. The real rich people in the movie industry are those that are in the movie business, the business of movie. And one of them is Tyler Perry. Yeah, like Tyler Perry is in the highest higher cadre of, or like the higher echelon of those in the movie industry. He's not just he's not just a producer. He's not just a movie person. He's not just a producer. He's not just a director, but he owns a full movie studio. You know, with a full movie studio where other directors, other movie producers and directors come to use. They pay him for their usage of his for his huge movie studios. A super large one. You should go do research on that if you have never heard or if you don't know much about Tyler Perry's movie stuff. So again, and entertainment, I mean, movie is part of it, right? Like in music, we see those who make huge money are the record label bosses, not the musicians, because the record label bosses, that the ones who pay them, they own their streaming rights, they own their, they control their shows, whenever they go for shows, perform to millions or thousands of people, you know, those money doesn't go directly to them. It goes to the record label bosses, and then they pay them from there. So for some of you who want to get into entertainment, especially music, if you want to be the bigger guy, you cannot make money from just being a singer. In Nigeria, there was this guy called, I think, Sosto Supericom. Yeah, that's his name. He used to be a music singer, but he didn't really make much money, not until he got into the music business. And today, people know him as one of the music executives, and he's um, he's super rich. So that is just that. So we're going to look into like a few more industries before we draw the curtain. And technology, the tech industry is super huge, it's super big. A lot of people, when you talk about technology, a lot of people know it's just programming. They say, this guy's a programmer, they make money. No, 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 no. The business of technology is different from programming. Oh, let me just throw back a little into that photography stuff. For those of you who are in photo editing, right, is still in the beginning of photography. Stuff like visual, like Adobe Illustrator, yeah, Adobe, in that industry too. Canva, they provide this framework for people to edit, to create a lot of visual stuffs. Canva is one of them. I just talked about Adobe Illustrator, and you name it. So if you want to make money, you should think about creating a software that will power this. So back into tech. The likes of Jack Ma of China. Jack Ma is not a programmer. He knows nothing about programming, but he runs one of the biggest tech companies in China. He owns Alibaba and Alipay. This company is fully powered by technology, but he himself is not a tech person. He entered into the business of technology. And it's important for you to know that you don't have to be a tech, like you don't have to be a programmer to get into the business of technology. The likes of Bill Gates, the likes of Bill Gates is in tech business. However, his angle of technology business is in licensing. These are another angle. Almost everyone who have a personal computer today uses one or two of or one, two, or even more of Microsoft products. We have the Office, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and you have to pay for the license to use them. And he had made a huge fortune by simply doing this. If you've been a follower of tech news, you would hear every now and then, the companies like Oracle, owned by Larry Ellison, putting a lawsuit against Google for using their APIs without having the license, suing them for billions and billions of dollars. So basically, um, to get into in every industry, you have to know who the big players are. It's not the programmers. When we get into even as little as web development, those who make money from web development are not those that are doing coding. You know, almost every web developer know platforms such as Team Forest. They specialize in building themes or build plugins, and people buy those themes and plugins, and they make ton of money. I don't know who owned that Team Forest, but I won't be surprised if he's not a programmer, but he's just in the business of web development, and he made a huge ton of money from that. So you have to understand this. You have to understand this in order to go um, forward. Now, in life in general, I should have talked about this earlier. In life in general, or in the value chain of business entrepreneurship, the closer you are to the soil, the less money you make. You know, when I started doing huge research on entrepreneur, I discovered this. And remember, I just talked about um, programming, like the tech business. So those that are closer, when I mean closer to the soil, I mean closer to the source of raw materials. The less money you make. We talked about how the programmers don't make as much money as those in the business of technology, like the Jack Ma's. They pay the programmers, while the programmers are the source of raw materials. They bring the codes, they write the codes for this platform to run. You know, in in the mining industry, we talked about stuff like diamond. To get into the business of diamond, it's more like a cartel. It's very, very. It's one of the most restricted industries to get into. But those that are closer to the soil, like those who mine the diamond from the raw form, they don't make as much money as those who refine diamonds and convert them to precious metal, convert them to jewelries and other valuable items. You know, so it's very, very important to know this. If you, just in case you're looking at the value chain of your industry, check if you're at the bottom. In agriculture, is the same stuff. Those who are working tilling the ground, don't make as much money as those who process, who transport, who do who process those raw materials, those who transport those materials from one location to the other. Right, like we've seen the likes of Mondelez International. They are the owner of Cadbury and Mika. As of 2024, they had an annual revenue of I think 38.5 billion US dollars. They're based in Chicago, but those who produced cocoa in Africa are not making anywhere close to that. They grow cocoa, they are closer to the source of the raw materials. They they sell them in its raw form to these guys, and these guys refine them, and have we now have stuff like bonfitas and stuff, and they make a lot of money. So you always have to know where you fall into. Same in the oil and gas business. In the oil and gas business, we have the big players like the Shell, Chevron. It used to be called Standard Oil. We have Shell, we have Chevron, the Mobiles, and you name it. There's a ton of them. But like Ajib too, I don't know if they still exist, if they're still answering Ajib, but um, these are the big players in the oil and gas industry. You have to know the business of your industry. In the value chain of oil and gas, a lot of people celebrate when they become offshore workers, and It's just crazy because they don't know. Well, they feel they are making a lot of money, but those in the business of oil and gas make a shitload of money. I talked about Mobile, Chevron. I mean, these guys are in the higher echelon of the oil and gas business. But when we just step it down a little, there are people who don't like I mean, the people who are not in that high rank, like the Aliko Dangotes who own refineries, there are people who are a little lower, those who own the oil dumps. You know, there's something called oil dumps, is like when oil is being refined, instead of after being refining, they put it in a very big reservoir for future use. It's called an oil dump. So that's one of them. Then there are people who still in the oil and gas industry, like the business of oil and gas. There are people whose job is to transport those oil or those gas with their trucks, their trucks or trailer from one point to the other, and they make a shit ton of money. They make a shit ton of money. There are some who build petrol stations for petrol station, gas stations, or you can call it fuel stations for people in their environment, and they make a lot of money, way more than those that are excuse me, way more than those in the offshore, working, or drilling, and you name it. Right. So that is what it is. Some of them you can see really huge chains. In Canada, we have the Petro Canada, is a huge chain of petrol stations. In the east coast of Canada, I think Ivan is the dominant one. Almost every city in the east coast, we have like the Fredericton, New Brunswick, Halifax, Prince Edward's Island, and what's the other one they're looking for? Okay, hold on. Nova Scotia, uh, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, Newfoundland. Yeah, yeah. You in almost everywhere there you see the Ivans. They are just there, and it's the same. We have the Owandos in Nigeria. We have the Mobile in Nigeria. So, and these people also give these bigger companies. They give people the opportunity to franchise and build and build fuel stations in their name. Now they're making money from franchising, and it's just unimaginable. It's unimaginable. So it's crazy. In civil engineering, those who make huge money are not civil engineers who build the roads. They are those who take the contract from the big, like they win the contract from government or from big organizations. We're talking about the likes of Julius Peja. I think there's one called Setraco in Nigeria. So it is what it is. You have to understand. You have to study the business of your industry. And in the banking industry, the big guys who make most of the money, they sit in the offices and go for board meetings and all that. But those that are closer to the ground, closer to the sort of the raw materials, some of them are called DSAs. And DSAs mean direct sales agent. Their work is to go to the field to fetch out clients. They get customers to come deposit money in the bank. They are given targets to make sure they have certain amount of weekly deposits or monthly deposits and the bank accounts they are controlling. They call the clients to you gotta put money in your bank account. It is their duty to do that. They are at the very, very bottom. They do all the work. They are the source of raw materials for the bank, getting clients, getting customers, making sure they open bank accounts, making sure they take loans, making sure, they do like a huge part of the job in the banking industry. They do it, but they are paid the least because they are closest to the ground. They are the source of raw materials for the banking industry. So you can just imagine whatever industry you are in and apply this. Again, for you to know the business part of your industry, you have to always ask yourself this very important question: who do we serve? how do we serve them, and why do we serve them? Once you're able to analyze and get this question, you are good. So, whoa, I can't even believe I've said a whole lot. There's so many, but I don't want to keep this episode so long because I'm working on a book on this, and that's why this was very interesting for me. I might do episode two subsequently, maybe when the book is about to come out, when I'm about to launch the book. I might do a second episode, but for now, I think I'm gonna draw this here. So, again, we've talked about how what entrepreneurship, I mean, like what a business is. I talked a little about the evolution of business. I talked about a little background of myself so you can understand that you're not alone. We are together. I've been in that position, and I somehow was able to liberate myself from that. We talked a little, not really consciously, but how we talked a little on how environment can affect your knowledge of things. We talked about some industries and the business angles to them. So it's interesting. Again, if you haven't watched the previous episodes, like I said, they are the bedrock for this episode. Please go and watch them. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please click on the subscription button and wait for the next episode. I think next in line, I think we're going to be talking about. Okay, let me just leave that. I'll leave it at a mystery. Last time I talked about this, and I don't want to do that next week. Just be on the loop. But it will probably stay in entrepreneurship. It's probably going to be either fundraising, or next episode is that on fundraising, or we're going to be talking about starting your first business. All right. So thank you very much for being here. Sorry, did I say starting your first business? No, no, no. Okay, I think I'm mixing something up. So I encourage us this time next week. You're gonna see the next episode. So thank you very much for being here today. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your energy. I appreciate the fact that you put in some of your precious time to listen to my rant about the business of your industry. I hope it is valuable to you. And please, if you do, share this with someone else, invite someone else to this channel, let them to subscribe, and I'm hopeful these messages will create great opportunities for someone else and also you who is introducing them to this channel. Thank you very much. My name is Gibson Odoka Jr. I am a business consultant. See you next week.